We're getting ready for week 13 of the fantasy football season. That means playoff time is almost here. While those other teams in your league are just sitting by and riding with what they got, or maybe just checked out because they don't think they'll make the playoffs, you can make your team better by being active on the waiver wire. Before we get to the waiver wire pickups and the injury report, let me remind you that this is a perfect time to sign up for Underdog Fantasy if you haven't done so already. If you use promo code ENDGAME, that gets you a 100% deposit match up to $100, and you get to take advantage of the new customer special. If you sign up right now, you have time to take advantage of this Justin Fields going higher than 0.5 total yards. If Justin Fields gets a yard on Monday night and you take that pick, you will get a free pick in addition to any other pick that you make and triple your money right away. So check it out right now, Underdog Fantasy. They have all sorts of promotions and giveaways you don't want to miss before the holiday season and before NFL season is up. You got to feel pretty good coming out of week 12 because there weren't a lot of major injuries. But let's go over the ones that matter and start with New Orleans Saints have a lot of injuries now. In that wide receiver room especially, Michael Thomas is already out with a knee issue. Chris Olave was on his way to a monster game potentially, already had 7 catches for 114 yards until he left in the third quarter with a concussion. He did not return, and you know how this goes. In the protocol, there is a chance that he misses next week. That would hurt because they also were down early in this game without Rashid Shaheed, who left with a thigh issue, and this could be something that keeps him out also. So you would think that this meant more of guy I talked about last week, A.T. Perry, who saw his first catch, first touchdown, a lot of usage last week. But no, Saints being the Saints, they of course gave Taysom Hill a little bit of run, but also Lynn Bowden Jr. came into the game. Probably didn't know he was even in New Orleans, did you? Keith Kirkwood got a couple of targets. This offense is just going to be really frustrating and hard to predict. So if Olave misses and Shaheed misses, I'd like to say that maybe you can lean on Perry as a streamer, but I also don't feel comfortable enough to do that. And then also a pair of big injuries for the Cleveland Browns, who suffered a loss to Denver. Well, Amari Cooper, their top receiver, left with a rib injury. The good news after the game is the x-rays came out negative. It doesn't seem like this is something that's going to be too serious, but at the same time, we don't know exactly what his status will be going forward. I mean, you already should have been concerned about Cooper because the last 2 games without Deshaun Watson, 4 catches for 34 yards and then 2 catches for 16 yards in this one. He basically is not startable at this point, so even if he doesn't play, I don't know if it really should matter. That leads me to the quarterback, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, the rookie. He had been holding his own, but he also left this game with a head injury. So P.J. Walker came in relief and looked like P.J. Walker does. You gotta wonder if DTR is going to miss week 13. Are we going to see Joe Flacco emerge from the grave and come to lead fantasy teams to glory? I mean, I highly doubt it, but look, if that happens, then maybe we could start looking at some of these other receivers as maybe desperation streamers or flexes because there are a lot of teams on bye this coming week. But still, if it's PJ Walker, I don't know that I can feel good about any of them. And then Demario Douglas of the Patriots, who had emerged as their number 1 receiver, he also left with a head injury. The good news is that it sounds like he avoided a concussion, so he should be back for next week. But the big issue here is just, do you want anything to do with this Patriots passing offense? Probably not. Now let's talk waiver wire. Who are the guys that are worth picking up if they're out there in your league? As you can imagine, at this point of the season, not a lot of unknowns, new emerging players here. I'm going to look at some veterans, players that might have been dropped or just left alone on the waiver wire recently because they hadn't performed. Let's start with a guy I talked about last week. I don't usually do a repeat. I don't like to just go over the same players over and over again. But it seemed like not a lot of people picked up Pat Freiermuth, even though he had just come back off IR. And even better, the offense coordinator Matt Canada is gone. I said if you had just lost Mark Andrews, this is probably your priority there at tight end, a guy you should be picking up. You should have started him. I mean, hard to know he was going to go off the way he did. Nobody saw this coming. I'm not going to claim that. But 9 catches for 120 yards and 11 targets. And it wasn't just him. I mean, you can't call it an explosion when a team goes for 16 points. But for the Pittsburgh Steelers relative to this entire season, it was kind of an explosion on offense. And it was the first time in what they say, like 50 games or something, they had 400 yards of offense, which is really pathetic. Look, it's pretty clear that the problem has been solved. And yes, Matt Canada was a problem. Freiermuth has been one of the top tight ends in the game since he was drafted. He's athletic. He's a pass-catching tight end. He's a fantasy starter when healthy. He's healthy. He's being used. I mean, Freiermuth is out there, especially if you don't have Mark Andrews anymore. You were riding him all season. You have to make a big claim for Freiermuth. You didn't do it last week. And now I'm going to come back around on a player who just a couple of weeks ago I said was droppable if you needed to and was not startable. But Christian Watson now looks startable, I will admit it. And I think if he's out there, look, why not go ahead and add him? And I'll tell you why. I don't need to explain about the talent and all that. You know he's a good player when he's healthy and when he's used. Also, don't want to just react to one big game. Yeah, he had a nice Thanksgiving Day. 5 catches, 94 yards, and a touchdown. Just second straight game with a touchdown. But really all season before then, he had not done much of anything. I mean, nagging injuries are just normal with him. And Jordan Love had struggled. But that's the thing here, is Jordan Love, who I recommended last week, he was my favorite streaming quarterback option. And he had himself a good game against Detroit, even on the road. He's showing what he's capable of, how he looked early in the season, and he kept faith in Watson. He keeps targeting him, especially in the end zone, and that's the thing. I pointed this out a couple of weeks ago talking about guys like Jayden Reed, why he was a strong pickup. Look, Jayden Reed did have more targets than Christian Watson in this game, but only by 1. But Watson keeps getting targeted in the end zone. They just hadn't connected. Well, now, here's another touchdown, and they're going to just keep going to him. And without Luke Musgrave at tight end, Watson's going to continue to get red zone looks. But we're really pushed over the edge for me to say, yeah, go ahead and pick up Watson again. And I think next week is going to be a little iffy, but going forward, you might want to start him because his upside is the schedule. So next week, the Packers get the Chiefs. It's not a great spot for him or the Packers. But then it's like a dream schedule down the stretch during the fantasy playoffs for passing offense to go against defenses like the Giants, the Tampa Bay Bucks, Carolina, and Minnesota. So I'm going to continue to be in on Jordan Love going forward, and I think now I got to say I'm back in on Watson. Now, if you're still playing the quarterback streaming game or you lost Joe Burrow, it happens. Or, again, this week we're going to have several quarterbacks on bye, including guys like Josh Allen. So you need somebody for a 1-week fix. I'm going to refer you back to Sam Howell. Think back to after week 10. Sam Howell was the leading passer in terms of yardage in the NFL and was a top 5 fantasy quarterback. And then he gets back-to-back division games and has just not been good. I mean, even against the Giants defense, threw 3 interceptions and lost that game. And then, of course, you might have seen what happened on Thanksgiving, humiliated basically by the Cowboys, and he didn't have a single touchdown. So understandably, he's available in a fair amount of leagues, and especially in leagues where, people are fighting to make the playoffs, can't risk another bad game by Howell. This offense has looked terrible, and I'm sure that debacle on national TV probably didn't help. But I'm going to keep some faith in Howell for this week because going back home and getting to face the Miami Dolphins. Now, the Dolphins are not a terrible defense. I mean, they looked great last week, and that's because they played the Jets. But this is a defense that can give up points through the passing game. But I really just think this is going to be a shootout because the Dolphins will have no problem scoring on the Washington defense. We know this. And so Howell's going to have to put up yards. I feel 50-plus pass attempts again. Like against the Cowboys, he did throw for 300 yards because he had to throw so much. He just didn't score. Well, the Dolphins defense isn't quite the Cowboys defense. They don't have Deron Bland back there. They don't have Micah Parsons. It's solid, but I feel Howell is in line for a big fantasy day. Maybe not a real life day, but who cares? Fantasy points, that's what we're looking for. In week 13, I'm going to make Howell my favorite streaming option. There really just isn't a lot out there for streaming in terms of quarterbacks. I guess Russell Wilson might be my next favorite choice. Maybe Jordan Love in a not great matchup. But if Howell's out there, I would definitely go with him. Now, on the other side of that matchup, I do expect Miami to score a lot. I think everybody can feel pretty good about starting their Dolphins against the Commanders' defense. Does that include a guy like Jeff Wilson Jr.? Before I explain why I'm going to recommend Wilson as a pickup, I get it. Devon Achane should be back. So if he does, that throws a lot of cold water on the Wilson pickup. But not completely. Devon Achane if he plays, will be used situationally, will be used once in a while, get some carries. He'll be eased back into action, I guarantee. So they don't want another re-injury of this same knee injury. They want to keep him fresh for the playoffs, I'm sure. So I do feel like Wilson is still the 1B here with HN as the 1C, Mostert as the 1A. I think there'll be plenty of room to eat against Washington here, against one of the worst rush defenses there is out there. Wilson was used a lot this past week, 11 carries for 56 yards and caught 3 passes too. I was hesitant to recommend him before I saw him actually get used. He finally got some usage, and I think that this week is a good time to roll him out if you need a desperation streamer because of the bye weeks. But more so than that, this is a running back stash / handcuff because we've seen Achane get hurt, we know Mostert could get hurt, and we know the Dolphins will use some sort of a committee. It won't be any just one guy. And though their final couple of games are pretty tough, the next couple of weeks, Jeff Wilson has a pretty good schedule too. Not just Washington this week, but teams like the Titans and the Jets. So I feel like Wilson is a guy who, in emergency, you could break out. Now, what about the guy that replaced him back in San Francisco, is the new handcuff to CMC? It's Elijah Mitchell. We know that the backup to Christian McCaffrey has value. We know Elijah Mitchell is the RB2 there. He's finally also healthy. Guy who, just like Jeff Wilson, is always banged up, but he's been there the last couple of weeks. He stayed on the field. On Thanksgiving night, he went for 39 yards on 7 carries. Now, I'm not going to say he has standalone value because he's only getting kind of the crumbs and the leftovers here when CMC is tired, but this is your weekly recommendation to stash your handcuff if you have CMC. Again, you have no reason not to have Elijah Mitchell on your bench somewhere. And even if you don't have to have that running back. If you have Mitchell and the other guy who has McCaffrey doesn't, something happens, you'll be happy that you have him. And then in a little bit deeper leagues here, you might need a running back streamer this week. Let's take a look at Samaje Perine. This is a guy I was really high on in the preseason. I drafted him quite a bit. Thought that he might be the guy in Denver. Javonte Williams has made his way back. He is the clear lead runner here, and Jaleel McLaughlin kind of emerged out of nowhere. But you might have noticed the last couple of weeks, especially during this win streak, it hasn't been much McLaughlin. It's been Perine on the field more. In Week 12, in their win over the Browns, which is one of the best defenses in the league, he went for 55 yards on the ground on just 7 carries. Javonte Williams had twice as many carries, more than twice, and only got 65 yards. Perine has been a little bit more effective, but also the main thing is he gives you a floor in PPR. Only caught 1 pass this past week. That was the first time all season he didn't have at least 2 receptions in a game. Last week, didn't do anything on the ground, but he caught 7 passes for 60 yards. He's been kind of the go-to, the trusted hand there by Sean Payton, which is what I had imagined before the season. He's a great pass catcher. He's a veteran. He doesn't make mistakes. He actually got a goal line carry this past week and scored a rushing touchdown, which is really rare for Denver because they just don't run the ball very well near the goal line, but Perine did it. Scored their 2nd rushing touchdown of the season. I can't say that the ceiling is super high with Perine, but again, he gives you some safe points in a PPR league. He's a guy that you can roll out there, maybe get a touchdown, maybe get you a double-digit game. And at this point, that's good enough for some teams who just want something on the bench that can help them. As you push toward the playoffs and try to win a championship in fantasy this year, keep it locked here. We got you covered every week. And don't miss our live streams every night. Start sit advice, trade advice, waiver wire, everything you need. And of course, check out our Week 13 playlist right here.